Welcome to this episode of the Cold Dead Hands podcast with your hosts, Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow and resident firebrand Brett Cross. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy as they bring you the stories told from the cold dead hands.
And victims who were lost in mass shooting events in the United States. Too often the media focuses on the perpetrators of these events and does not give voice to those that we have lost. I'm Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. I am one of the foremost experts on firearms in the world, having published about 17 publications on the health and well-being aspects of firearms, as well as the social determinants of gun ownership and gun policy support. So in other words, why do people own guns and why do they support certain gun policies? As always, my co-host is
Brett Cross. I lost my son Uzziah in the Robb Elementary School shooting here in Uvalde in 2022. And since then, I have been fighting to make sure that his legacy is change in this world, because all he wanted to ever do was help people. And through his name, through his face, through his memory, he will get to do that.
So tonight we have a special guest, Beverly King, who is a survivor. Beverly, you want to talk a little bit about who you are and why you're here?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Beverly King. I live in upstate New York, about an hour from Montreal, so on that northern Canadian border, about 6 hours from New York City. Nice and cold and snowy it is here today. I am a survivor of Route 91 Harvest Festival, Las Vegas, October 1st of 2017. And I have some really good friends who lost their daughter there that night. So I'm here to speak on surviving such a tragic event and my life kind of that's forever changed and how it's impacted me.
Yeah. So why don't you, start us off like, going back with, what you were doing in Vegas, like why you were there, who you were with, and kind of like walk us through, the leading up to the event.
Sure. So, like I said, I live in New York. I'm from a family of 9. So I have a couple sisters that live out in Las Vegas, and I usually would go out there, once or twice a year to visit. My youngest 2 sisters were taking a long planned trip to Italy. So my youngest sister asked me if I'd go out and watch her 2 young children for 2 weeks while they were gone. And absolutely, I said I would. I'll go stay in your $1 million home and swim in your pool and watch your children for you. So I happened to be out there. I am a big, huge country music fan. Sorry, Brett, but I am. And I'd always wanted to go to this particular festival, but I was never out there in October. It just never happened. So I was out there, didn't have plans to go, didn't have tickets to go. I knew it was in town, but I thought, okay, I'm here to watch these kids, and that's great. And guess I'll just watch it on TV. So, kind of last minute, my niece, who also lives out there, I am 63 years old. My niece is, I don't know, 34, 35. I'm guessing her age. And so my niece has been to a lot of festivals. She's not particularly fond of country music, but she's been to a lot of those festivals, lived in Las Vegas for quite a few years herself. And so she did say if we ended up, where we would be able to go for a night, that she'd be glad to go with me, take me. I myself have only been to concerts on a smaller scale in stadiums, that type of thing. So I had never been to an event that was an outdoor event with 20,000 people. So she did offer to, go along with me if I wanted to go. But, initially it was just, it was watching the kiddos. My niece was 2 and my nephew was 7 at the time. And so I got there a couple days before the festival started. And my sisters were off to Italy. So I was enjoying the sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll forgive you for the country music. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people like hearing about dogs running away and girlfriends leaving and trains running over things. I mean, because I think that's all country music's really about, scarecrows, beer, whatever it is that they sing about. Yeah, so your older niece came. Did she go with you to this festival because she volunteered?
Yeah, well, kind of last minute, one of my sisters that was going on this trip, she at the time worked for a pretty big organization in Las Vegas. And so oftentimes she was able to, obtain tickets to go to different events and different concerts and shows. And she said to me on her way to the airport that she might be able to get us tickets to go for one of the nights. And I said, "That's great if you can. If you can't," she called me when she got to the airport and said, "You can either go Saturday or Sunday." One of her friends was only able to go one of those days, and so I called up my niece and I said, "Are you willing to go?" And she said, "Sure. You pick the night because I don't really like country music and I'm just taking you." And I said, "Okay, great." So my choice was Sunday because I wanted to see Jason Aldean. I had seen a lot of country music artists, but I'd never seen him in concert. So um, that was my choice. And so we decided on the Sunday and, got ready, and we left the house about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to head over to the venue.
Okay.
Uh,
So
It was, yeah, it was quite an experience because I was in awe of the size. The outdoor festival area was about 15 acres. So between, one whole side of food and one whole side of drinks and, the different stages, because there was the main stage and like two other side stages for, artists that were up and coming. It was it was just, to me, I was just it was a little overwhelming going into, but it just seemed like so much fun. I mean, everybody was just having a blast. And granted, we didn't get there till like 4 or 5 o'clock. Now, this thing had been going on all weekend and people had been there most of the day. So obviously, there was a lot of drinking going on and, a lot of very happy people, very, very happy people.
so when you got there to the festival, I mean, and you said there's a lot of people, a lot of drinking. What was kind of the vibe? What was that like?
The vibe was everybody just was very friendly, and people that you didn't know, like, "Hi, how are you?" Like, every just it seemed very relaxed. you know I said a lot of drink. I mean, it wasn't like they were stumbling around drunks. I mean, it was just a very festive atmosphere, and everybody seemed really cool. And one of the things we did notice, and which I found very odd. But because I'd only been to smaller events, maybe, but there was a lot of people with dressed in American flags, like literally, like the shirts and the outfits. And there was some guy running around in, basically a speedo that was the American flag, this hat, and we were kind of a little bit.
That's
I
a little
personally I
fascinating.
personally was taken aback by it. I thought it was very disrespectful. And even though I love country music and I know a lot of country music fans, it's, the whole God bless America, wave the flag type thing. But I found that very disrespectful in some of the dress that I saw. And so did my niece. I I'm a veteran, and my niece was, married to someone who was in the service for many, many years. And so we just both were, found that very odd. And she actually was taking pictures without people seeing her of all of these people that were just dressed so crazy, with these flags. And so um,
You
that,
get a flag code violation, and you get a flag code violation.
yes, Yes, it's exactly what I thought. I mean, I thought, okay, this is like just really strange. Like, why are people doing this? It was a little offensive, but I thought, okay, this is what they do at this type of event. And so we, like I said, we got there about 4 o'clock. And so, roamed around, listened to some music on one of the side stages, got some drink, got something to eat, and as it got closer to say 8, 9 o'clock, the crowd really started to fill in. Um, you know, Jason Aldean took the stage a little before 10. Um, so, probably by 9 o'clock or so, 9:30, there were like 22,000 people there. And one of the most incredible parts of the night, I will say, before it turned tragic, was Big and Rich were up on the stage, and they sang "God Bless America." And I still have this video. I still have this video on my phone where everybody had their lights on their phones, and the whole entire crowd was singing. And it's just an incredible video. It just gives me chills every time I see it and listen to it, because being in that moment with those 22,000 people, and at this point, you're shoulder to shoulder, like with everyone. Like, it's so packed. You're just shoulder to shoulder. But everyone was singing this at the top of their lungs. And it was, at that point, I didn't care about all those crazy people with their flag dress on. I just thought, what an incredible experience this was right here, right now, this moment.
Yeah, and I think, I
Um,
mean, for those that haven't attended like a large event like that or a concert, right? We can see it in things like, even like a Taylor Swift concert where the whole crowd comes together, and it is a powerful, magical moment, right? And you don't expect like tragedy to occur, right? Because there's almost like a camaraderie, because despite what your politics may be or your belief systems, right? Like, you're all there in unison for this shared cultural experience, right? That brings everybody together. But it did turn tragic.
yes, yes, it did. And as we moved up into the crowd closer to the stage area, because my niece has been to a lot of these really big events, and way younger than me, she's like, come on, we're going up front, and she's like barreling through the crowd, and I'm just following her, and I'm like, I'm trying to be nice and not push people around, and she's just kind of barreling through because we got to get a good spot. And so even though she doesn't even like Jason Aldean, bless her heart.
That's that concert etiquette. You get to the front.
Get to the front. And so you know, a little bit before he was going to come on, we had gone and got a drink, and we were trying to make our way back up towards the front. And I said to her, if you're looking at the stage, I said, let's go to the right side. I wanted to go over to the right. Um, I just thought we'd have a better view and, just be able to get a better spot. But as we tried to make our way over there, how they have the backstage, I don't know what you call that, where they have all their sound stuff. So that's to the back. They have their little runway kind of in the middle, in the center. So, it's got gates from one side to the other side, and then their stage where they do all their lighting and their mixing and everything. So we had to go around that. And there were so many people that my niece said, let's just stay over here to the left. We're not going to be able to get through. And I'm like, okay. So we stayed on the left, and we made our way up. Probably, I would say we were probably 100 feet from the front of the stage, and probably about the same distance from the very center of the stage, the center divider. That's about where we were. So we had a really good spot. And I was really excited. You know, he came out, and he sang a few songs. And my niece did a lot of the videotaping for me, because one, she's like 4 foot taller than I am. She's pretty tall. And because this really wasn't her thing and it was my thing, she was awesome at doing a lot of videos for me that night. And so she literally had her video going, and I'm enjoying the music. And we hear the first popping sounds. And these were individual. And literally just like a couple seconds apart, maybe 4 or 5. And when people say it sounded like fireworks, I know in different tragedies, people have said that. And that's exactly to me what it sounded like. Some people thought it was the speakers. I actually said to my niece, that sounded like fireworks. I said, that's kind of stupid in a crowd this size. Like, why would somebody do that in a crowd this size,
Right.
right? Like, that was just my first thought. And then, now mind you, she's still videoing, Jason on the stage. And all of a sudden, the first round of the automatic fire came. And even when that first burst came, it was almost like people were looking around. Like, first of all, you had no idea where it was coming from, and you didn't expect it. And it was kind of like this moment of like, what is that? Like, what is that? And mind you, to the right side, on the other side of that crowd, was the strip. So, you've got the strip is right there. So you couldn't tell if that's where the sound was coming from. For me, it sounded like it was coming from that side. And then it stopped. And then in the next burst of gunfire, Jason and his whole crew were off the stage. Like, all of a sudden, run off the stage, people were screaming, and people were basically hitting the ground. And then the stage went totally dark. Everything was dark for just a couple seconds, and then they turned the lights on. So basically onto the crowd, until the next round came. So, reloading whatever he was doing. So you had a few minutes. I don't even know if it was minutes. It's hard to tell time when that's going on, but in between the sound of literally,
Right.
trying to make the sound. So now at this point, we know it's gunfire. We have no idea where it's coming from. To me, it sounded like it was in the crowd. It sounded like somebody was in this crowd, or more than one person. And now everybody's down on the ground, literally on top of each other, because when we were standing up, we were shoulder to shoulder. So now we're laying on top of each other, basically. And people were screaming and yelling. And so in between these bursts, people were getting up and running. We couldn't get up and run. We couldn't get up and move because there were so many people behind us that until they moved, we couldn't move. We just couldn't move. And I remember my niece, laying on the ground, and I was on top of her, and she's a single mom and had 2 kids at home, 2 young kids at home. And I could just hear her saying, I need to get home to my kids. I can't die here. And I looked up at the corner of my eye. I looked up, and I could see this guy just in a little bit distance from us. And in between the rounds, I would see him when I got quiet for a second. I could see him stand up, and he had a white t-shirt on and a cowboy hat, and he looked military. I mean, he just had the haircut and all, and he kept pointing for people to get up and move, for the people behind us to get up and move. So like we could move, we could run. And then he'd get down. And then in between, and I finally said to my niece, I said, we have to go. Like, we are not safe here. We have to get up. And she didn't want to get up. And I said, no, I think I just kept focused on this guy who kept getting up. And I thought, I don't know what there is about this guy, but somehow I think we need to follow that guy. And so we finally were able to get up. And when the gunfire stopped again, people started to move, and we got up and we ran. And I'm holding her hand. Now, mind you, now it's dark and it's 20 some thousand people, and I have no idea where I am. Don't know the layout. And going into this event, there was one way in and one way out. You went through a section that had, like they did have the metal detectors and the wands and that. We had bracelets that were on because it was a festival, so you could go in and out throughout the weekend, as long as you had your bracelet on. And so I'm holding her hand, and she's leading me. And all I kept saying in my head, now mind you, gunfire is going on this whole entire time. The whole entire time we were running. And we're watching people get hit. I mean, we're watching people go down. And we just kept running. And in my head, I kept saying, don't let go. I was so afraid that we were going to get separated. And I was so afraid we were going to get separated. So I kept saying, don't let go, don't let go, don't let go. And we get to the back side of this venue, and the whole entire venue was gated and concrete barriers all the way around, except for where we came in, which I don't even know at that point, you don't even know where that was, because I don't even know what that was. So people couldn't get out. People were literally throwing people over these 10-foot barricades. People on the outside had trucks trying to pull down the fences. So we got to this spot where there were two concrete barricades, where there was this little tiny, like you could squeeze through if you went sideways. And there were people going through there, and there was two guys trying to get people not to push each other so that we could go like one at a time, because you could only go one at a time. And at that spot where we squeezed through, literally there were people pushing people up over these barricades and up over these fences, and anyway, trying to get out. And we got beyond that, ran through, I don't know, parking lots and these back parking lots, dark streets. And at the end of the strip is the MGM, and the airport's on the other side, the backside of the airport, where the fuel tanks are. And there's a little Motel 6. And basically then you're kind of going out in the middle of nowhere. And so we ended up in front of this Motel 6. And gunfire's still going on. And people are screaming and running behind us. And so we all, I don't know, probably about 100 I'd say 100 people or more ran into this Motel 6. And they took us all into their like conference room and all these back little rooms they had. And basically we were sitting almost in this closet area on the floor with probably about 15 other people in this tiny little room. And there was these couple young, I don't know, 20-year-olds. I have kids at the time, I have kids that age. My kids are older, and these two young girls from out of state, just totally terrified and not knowing what to do and whatever. And one of them had asthma really bad, so she had an inhaler, and it was just this dark room. And then you could hear the sirens and the choppers and the sirens. And my niece called. I didn't even make a phone call because, living on the East Coast, my husband was here on the East Coast, so it's the middle of the night. And my sisters, they're in Italy. And so my niece's mom, my oldest sister, lived in Vegas there. But my niece called her friend who worked on the strip, and she told her where we were. And bless her heart, she got in her car and she drove back roadside. She drove on one ways the wrong way. And she was able to get to this Motel 6 parking lot before they shut all these roads down. And she picked us up along with, we fit, I don't know what kind of car she had. It was this tiny little, almost like a Volkswagen kind of car. But she fit like 8 of us in this car because these other people just wanted a way out. And so she got us out. And at that point, we drove back to my niece's, my sister's house, my niece's mom's house. We drove there first. And she had the TV on. And I remember walking in, I think at this point, you're not comprehending. Like I totally was not comprehending like the magnitude of really what happened. Like it was like just this mode of like I don't even know what's going on. And I remember standing in that living room and looking at the TV and seeing all these, people being carried out. And there's one person that was being pushed out in a wheelbarrow that had been shot. And I don't, it's interesting in that moment, when I go back and think about it, it's been 7 years. But in that moment, there were no tears. I had absolutely no emotion other than that fear inside of when I was running. I thought, I'm not going to make it home. Like, I'm not going to see my kids. Like, I'm not, like my parents were still alive at the time. I have 4 children and I have grandchildren, and I just, I thought, here I am. I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps, and I thought, I'm going to die here. This is where I'm going to die. And so being in my sister's living room watching that TV, it was like a frozen moment of numbness of that.
Yeah. I mean,
Survival.
for those listening, we're talking about the Las Vegas shooting in 2017 at the Jason Aldean concert. The deadliest in history by a lone gunman. 60 people lost their lives. 413 were shot or hit by shrapnel. And I think 867 people overall hurt because of the panic that ensued, including trying to get over that fence that you mentioned earlier. When people started to realize what was actually happening, what immediately happened around you besides some people falling to the ground? Like, what was, it went from this happy, loving, kind of connected moment to what?
Pure, I'd say, when I say pure chaos, I don't even know in some ways initially that it was chaos. I think people didn't get it. People didn't understand what was happening. And, it wasn't until obviously after we realized that this shooting was coming from above us. I do believe that in looking at people's faces and the people standing around us, and some people were still some people stood up and didn't get down on the ground. Other people were yelling at them to get down on the ground. But it was almost like, what do we do? Like, what do we do? What's going on? It was, and so there was kind of like no movement for a little bit, except for the people that were way on the outskirts. The people that were in the outskirts that could probably see a little bit better than where we could, because we were in the thick of it. Like, we were so close to the front that, but then there were people that were right up to that front gate that were literally going over that gate and under the stage. I mean, like, it was that. And then you had people that were standing up and videoing. There was a guy not too far from me standing up with his phone out, videoing why the shots were going off. And like, when I would think about that later, and I'm thinking, like, I don't, granted, people were there most of the day and there was, probably a lot of drunk people, but like, that was not the first thing in my mind to take on my phone and let's do a video. But honestly, there were people standing and just videoing, and and
I mean, if you think about it, though, it kind of makes sense, right? Like, you're in this moment where you're like, I'm probably going to die. I might as well, like, at least record what happens, because, live, laugh, toaster bath, right?
right, right. And I do see, because I did initially, after, there were a lot of videos like that, a lot of cell phone videos that were posted online, and I did watch a lot of them. Some of them were ones where people just basically had their phone on, so where they could hear, so you could hear what was going on. Um, People were calling loved ones and, basically, saying their goodbyes, or, and I thought about that later. I thought to myself, I never called anybody. Like, I didn't, like, I think I was so much in shock. Like, I didn't, I didn't call anybody. I didn't call
Yeah.
anyone. And then but I remembered what I did was, the next morning, though, I said to myself that night, I have to make sure I get up. I talk to my husband. I call him before he turns the news on, because he knew we were going. I talked to him before we left. So he had no idea what happened. So I thought, I have to, call him before he turns the news on, or before, someone calls him and tells him. But and some people were actually, though, there were people that were on the outskirts when people were running, that were saying, it's not gunfire, it's not gunfire, it's just, it's electrical, and, what are you running for? And but we saw people being shot. Like, we saw people on the ground. Like, these are people that were, like, way not even close up. So they didn't they didn't realize, like, they didn't realize what was going on.
That
Um,
or that or in situations like that, you don't want to believe that that is going on as well. So it might have been one of those situations where you're saying this. Who are you trying to make believe that, us or you?
right,
That
but
could possibly be one of the situations, because it does happen, because you don't want to, you said it earlier, it took a minute because people didn't understand the gravity of the situation. And then when it does set in, then it just became pure pandemonium.
right. And if we had actually made our way to the right hand side of the stage where I wanted to go, I probably wouldn't be sitting here, because the majority of the people that were killed were on that side of the stage. But, you know, there was a young girl who was actually killed in one of those parking lots that we ran through. You know, that's where her little memorial is in one of those back parking lots where she lost her life, you know.
I think that was the young victim. She was 20 years old, I want to say.
Actually, this one was, I think she was 22. I know the one that was 20. I'm good friends with a woman who actually found her mom because she was with her mom and they got separated. And she found the mom and ended up took her throughout the night before they found out what hospital she was at and where she was. And but this young girl was not. I think she was maybe 22, so she was one of the youngest ones.
I think the first victim, I want to say, was 67. The youngest was 20.
Yeah, yeah. Bailey was her name, and she was 20. She was the youngest. She was from California, and Melissa Ramirez is the one from the parking lot, and you know, another young girl, you know, just in college, just starting her life, you know, just starting her life out. But you know, had we made it to that right hand side of the stage, I don't, I don't know. You know, one of the things I will say is afterwards, when I got back to my sister's house where I was watching these kids, I had someone else come in that was, you know, basically babysitting for me, taking over my nanny duties. And so the kids were in bed. And at this point, my sisters that were in Italy did know about it. Because the one sister that had gotten us the tickets to be able to go had a very high level job in Las Vegas at the time. So she basically was woken up to all the news, you know, with the time difference. But so she was on the phone with my niece right away, and then at least knew we were safe and that. And when I got back to the house, my youngest sister had called her neighbor, who happened to be a grief counselor for children, who lived right down the road. And so she sent her to the house, and I had never met this woman. And I remember her coming in, and she was just so nice and sweet, and she wanted to stay with me for the night. And I'm total, I will say this, total numbness. I was like, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm okay. You know, I'm good. I'm okay. So she stayed for me for a while, and I took her number and she left. And my sister made arrangements for someone else to take my nephew to school for the next couple days. So I didn't leave the house for a couple days. I didn't leave the house. My nights were absolutely horrible. They were just horrible. Like, I didn't sleep. But the daytime wasn't so bad because I had my niece, you know, she was 2. So, you know, I had to take care of her. And so I actually thank God for that, because I think, you know, she kept me sane in that moment of, okay, you know, like, I'm here, I've got to watch her. My sisters couldn't get home from Italy, and they weren't coming home for another 8 days. So, like, okay, I'm good. So, third day, I have to bring my nephew to school, which is like, I don't know, 10 minutes away. So I get ready and I open up the garage door, and I remember looking outside, and I froze. I literal panic attack. I'm like, I can't go. And of course, my nephew is like 6. He's like, come on, let's go. We got to go. And I'm literally frozen in my spot, looking outside, thinking, I can't go. I can't get in this car. I physically could not move. this, I don't know, the sheer terror and panic inside was something so overwhelming. And I, I and I can hear him saying, "We got to go to school. We got to go to school." And finally, I'm like, okay, like just get in the car, like bring him to school. You're gonna be fine. And so, literally, I'm in this car driving, white knuckled, probably driving 10 miles an hour, um, to this school, thinking in my head, all right, just get to the school, drop them off. Just get to the school, drop them off. Not realizing at that time when I had to drive him to school, where she lived and where the school was overlooking the strip.
Mhm.
So now I'm driving right into where I crest this little hill, and that's all I can see. And I got him to school and I dropped him off and I got back, and we went through the next 8 days until, my sister came home. And I feel like it's just kind of going through the motions of each day. I feel like there was still no emotional breakdown, like there was just, I was reading the papers every day. I saved every newspaper. I have every newspaper article. I, but at nighttime, I would have a hard time at night, but I still was in this state of like, all right, I'm just gonna, almost like this didn't happen, right? Like this really didn't happen.
The
Like it really,
denial.
yeah, the denial, like you just cannot believe that this could happen. And looking at all these people that had been killed and all these people that had been injured. And then my niece called, and they had the crosses that they had put up for the memorial, and she wanted to go down. And so we went down. Um, we went down to the crosses, to the memorial site, and it was surreal. And it's it's just unexplainable. I mean, like you just can't, I and then that being there is where that guilt started, that survivor's guilt of like, how did I, like, why am I here? Like,
Yeah.
how did I make it out?
And that's something I think that even Brett can attest to. If you want to talk about it for a second, Brett.
You cut out there, Ben.
That's something I think you can even attest to if you want to talk about even your own experiences with survivor's guilt, right? Because I think that's kind of a natural response when you lose somebody in a tragic event or you experience a tragic event and you're like, why the hell did I survive?
Oh yeah. Survivor's guilt is not something that's really talked about a whole lot. And I have it, because it's one of those things. Why not me? Right. Like, especially when, losing your own child, like you would gladly give up your life for that. But I've seen it the worst in my son. My other son was in the 4th grade as well, and he didn't go to school that day. And so I saw it more so with him because, he was like, I wish I would have went to school. I wish he would have came to my classroom instead, and hearing a 10-year-old say that is just is heartbreaking. And my son's a bigger kid. I mean, he's 13 right now, and he's almost 6 foot. So he's always been a bigger guy. And he was like, we could have fought him. I didn't protect my brother. And it's just, yeah, it's something that isn't talked about enough, I don't think. Because especially when you're a survivor, and Beverly, I think you can attest to this, outside people will just be like, be happy that you're here. And they can't fathom the the thoughts of it should have been me, or why wasn't it me, or what was the reason, and all of these things that will literally keep you up at night.
Yeah. And people, and too, Brett, the people that make the comments, kind of like that, or, it was meant to be, or it was God's plan, and, whatever. However well intended maybe they may be, or they say it because they don't know what else to say. I I just was like, I don't want to hear any of I don't want to hear any of that. It made my anger, what turned from survivor's guilt to the anger part, really came from a place of that, a place of where I felt people didn't get it and didn't understand, and moving on like it was just another day, and like kind of pretending it didn't happen. And
But
in the me
you
you know
know,
what I mean?
yeah, to kind of interrupt you there for
Yep.
just a second, but to kind of think about it, it kind of highlights. I want to point out your T-shirt. You're wearing "The Sound of Children's Screams has been removed,"
Yeah.
right? Which
Yep.
was Uvalde. That's Brett's tragedy
Right.
here, right?
Yep.
But when you say that people can't understand it, that T-shirt I think really sums it up. Why? Right? Because we've made these events, they happen so regularly, with such frequency, that we're kind of numb to it, and then we make it palatable for clicks and views. Right? In that particular clip from Uvalde, they removed the sounds of children being murdered and the screams of those children, but left in the sounds of the gunfire. Right? The gunfire is still there. They just removed the sounds of screaming to make it palatable for people to listen to. Right? And that's why they don't get it. That's why they don't understand why this is such like a life-altering, life-changing event, because for them it's a video game or a movie, or something like that, a television show, right? Like a NCIS episode kind of thing. And it's
Right.
not a real life experience. And the sad part, and Brett and I say this all the time, is that it's not if you will experience one of these events, it's when will you experience one of these events now, because they happen so often that people from Sandy Hook have experienced now 2 and 3 of these events, like
Right.
in their lifetime. And how wild is that? You survive one as a 6-year-old, you go off somewhere, and suddenly you're in another one, and then you're somewhere else, and you're in another one, right? Like that is unfathomable to most of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that when I came home, some people, my niece has navigated her journey, I call it kind of a journey of healing, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I don't know that there's an end to this. For me, it's changed a lot in 7 years, but her and I traveled very different paths. She did therapy for, a short period of time. Um, and she never participated in any of the memorial events, didn't she she put hers almost like in a box, and that's kind of where it is. And for her, I think it was a different survival mode because she was a single mom. She had 2 kids at home. She lived in Vegas, so she had to be there every day. And so when the 1 year came up and the 2 year came up and they had events, she didn't go to any of them. She would go out of town. She would take her kids camping or whatever. For me, coming home to a very small town in the middle of nowhere, right? And to having, where a lot of, victims and survivors were from the West Coast. I mean, they were from all over, right? But the majority, were lived on the West Coast, California, and that I, I, I had, I had no one. I had no one, and I'm one of those people that I have to process, right? I have to talk about it. I have, oops, sorry, drop my phone. So I have to talk about it. I have to be able to deal with it and talk about it and express it and get it out. And people didn't want to hear about it. People didn't like, it was like, okay, well, oh, I'm so glad you're okay. And so sorry that happened. And now hopefully they won't take my guns away from me, and I'm just, uh, you know,
That they also don't want to feel uncomfortable. I've noticed a lot. People do not like feeling uncomfortable. So if they have to, and this goes back to just a little bit ago, when we were talking about, um, that people don't know what to say. This was, God's plan, or there was a reason or anything. They don't, I don't truly believe that people say that for your benefit or for my benefit or for the benefit of the people. I think they say these things to make themselves feel better, because as humans, we do not like being uncomfortable. And for people like you and I, we will forever be uncomfortable. The carnage that you witness, that's not something that you can just wipe away, even through therapy. I mean, it's still there. You just learn how to navigate continue navigating forward, but it's still always there in the forefront of literally everything.
Yeah.
well,
Let's do a reset, and then we can come right back to this topic. So for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to Stories from the Cold Dead Hands, a radio show where we lift up the voices of those who either survived a mass tragedy or were the victims of a mass shooting. I'm Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. I'm one of the foremost experts in the world on guns in America, having published about 17 publications on the health and well-being aspects related to firearms, as well as the social determinants of gun ownership and gun policy support. So in other words, why do people own guns and why do they support certain policies? My co-host, as always, is Brett Cross. Brett?
I'm Brett Cross. I lost my son Uzziah in the Robb Elementary School shooting on May 24th, 2022. And yeah, just, still here fighting for a safer place so that other parents do not have to bury their child, so that not another child has to witness the things that my son witnessed and suffer the same fate that my son suffered.
And tonight we're joined by Beverly King, a survivor of the Las Vegas mass shooting. We've been kind of talking about like the event and the things like survivor's guilt and how you get past, right? Like you're a veteran, you're a Marine. Like survivor's guilt is kind of common there. PTSD is common with being a military, veteran and personnel, but you've got this extra layer, right? This extra, added like trauma, right? Most veterans don't expect to come home and then experience a war zone in their own country, right? How have you navigated dealing with all the varied traumas? Like, how has it changed you?
I can tell you, if I am not the person I was 7 years ago, you know, um, totally, totally not that person. I was always very outgoing and, talkative and, let's go here and let's go there. And, like I was the first one to volunteer to do things and just very happy-go-lucky. And, you know, I come from a very close knit, family. There was 9 of us, and my parents were married for 65 years, before they passed away, and we very small town, and we just everything felt so connected, and and even my military service was um, not a long period of time, and I didn't I fortunately didn't wasn't deployed. you know it was a time, it was before they went to Desert Storm, so I got out right just as they were going to Desert Storm. So I didn't witness anything like that, and being a survivor of this type of mass shooting, the PTSD, I will have to say, I never could understand that. Like I didn't understand, you'd hear about people who would, came home from Vietnam and, all these other wars and, even Afghanistan and Iraq and soldiers and the suicides. And, you hear about it, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. And so for me, the first 6 months, my husband literally woke me up every single night from nightmares, every single night for the first 6 months. Um, you know, and my nightmares were initially, they weren't even about the shooting, but they would be things like, I'm stuck in this cave and I can't get out. You know what I mean? This mining cave, like this dark cave, right? This feeling, this overwhelming feeling of like I can't get out. And so for me now, years of therapy, thank gosh, because without therapy, I probably wouldn't be here today. I mean, there were those dark thoughts. I know Brett's mentioned it. You know, you're here because you still have other children. You know, my thoughts are the same. I have children and I have grandchildren. And at the time, my parents were still alive. You know, um, had it been just me, I can't say that I would be here because there were some really dark moments. And so you go through therapy, you go through a lot of, it changes you in the way, even with my anger, my emotions, I was never an angry person, I'd say, like certain things, might have, ticked me off, but um, I have to watch it now. Like I really have to watch what triggers me, um, because it truly, I feel like it changed my personality. It changes who I want to be around. Um, it it changes the kind of conversations I want to have with people. I'm not as willing to let people just kind of say whatever they want to say and just kind of blow it off. I don't do that anymore. And I was never like that. I was never like that. It was kind of like everybody get along, butterflies and rainbows and whatever. And it does change you. And in some aspects, I'd say maybe for the better, and some definitely not for the better. And sadly, it's not something you ever get away from. I don't care how much therapy you go through. It it truly changes your life.
So
Almost to like a molecular level, like it literally changes almost everything.
So our listeners have a question, Beverly, and I'm kind of curious about this too. What were your thoughts on the Second Amendment before this event? I know what most veterans kind of feel about it, but I want to know specifically what were your thoughts, and then how have those feelings evolved after experiencing this?
Well, I remember I remember saying to my therapist, because I was really angry with one of my brothers. I have two brothers. And I remember my youngest brother and I were really close. And I remember being angry with him because he never talked about it. He never said, hope you're doing okay, like never reached out a hand. Like if the conversation ever came up, like he'd leave the room. And I was very angry and I couldn't understand. And I remember having this conversation with my therapist about it. And she said, well, sometimes the people that are closest to you have the hardest time, have the hardest time. They really care about you. They don't know what to say. Um, and then she said to me, so what did you think about when you would see these things happen before? And so I really thought about it and I thought, okay, you're right. I, saw things happen on TV. You turn the TV on and, here's another school shooting and another school shooting. And and I would think back and I'd like, oh, that's so horrible. And I'd be so heartbroken. And then you turn the TV off and you go to work and you go about your day and you don't even talk about it because it's kind of like, it didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to anybody I know. So like, okay, I just moved on. I grew up in a family. My dad hunted all his life. Um, and, my husband, my ex-husband was, 25 years in the Marine Corps, huge, huge collection of weapons, big NRA guy, lifetime member, the whole thing. And I don't remember ever really thinking about the Second Amendment and that, you know, like they say, thou shalt not be infringed. Everybody gets to own one. I never even really had that thought process. Um, and then this happens, and I'm angry because people don't care that it keeps happening, right? And then the conversation always turns to politics and guns, right? And the first person that said to me within the first week I got home, it's not the guns. Guns don't kill people. And I about lost it. Well, I have to say I did lose it on them. And I did lose it. And so I have to say that I do say previous to this that yes, I never look I guess I never really thought like, yes, I was in the military and we hunted, I had a hunting license. I never went and hunted anything because I decided, I loved deer meat, but I love venison, but I just didn't want to kill a deer. I just didn't want to do that. So let somebody else do that. So it didn't affect me until this happened to me. And that's, I think, kind of sad. And I've heard Brett say it, is that not kind of advocating or not kind of saying anything prior. I've learned so much just listening to Brett talk about the Second Amendment, honestly, from his lives, because things that I didn't know. I mean, even though I served and I took that oath and I read those words and you know what I mean, I I really I really didn't I really didn't look at it that way. And listening to Brett, and I can tell you anybody that's listening to this, if you've not um, listened to Brett's lives on TikTok, I suggest you do, because and really educate yourself, because that's why I started listening, and since then, um, become more educated. I don't I don't believe in taking everybody's weapons away. And I don't believe that, putting new gun reforms in place will stop it all. I don't believe that, sadly. But I do believe that we have to do something. This can't be normal. We can't continue to make this normal. Like, it's not normal. And it's sad that it takes Brett, you losing a child, or myself, surviving something like this, and all the other parents who've lost, um, or those that have been injured, they're the ones that's speaking out, and everybody else is just holding on to those weapons like, that's the only thing that matters.
Well, I like to quote, Ronald Reagan here, right? Like, because you said something like interesting, like that that the laws reforms won't stop at all, right? And like, so I like to quote Ronald Reagan when he said, when he was pushing for the assault weapons ban in 1994, and he said that while we know the banning of these weapons will not eliminate all crime with these weapons, the research shows it will cause the supply to dry up, thus reducing the total number of crimes that can be committed, right? And I think that brings us back to this whole idea of what is the purpose of law. And Brett and I talk about this all the time on TikTok, not so much on the radio show, but on TikTok we do. And the purpose of law is never to eliminate all instances of a thing. It is to reduce the number of that thing happening. And when it comes to gun violence in particular, no one law is going to solve the problem, but maybe a combination of laws can reduce it to a point that this, just would not happen, right? Like if we had tracking on ammunition, for instance, this guy bought like 1,600 rounds of ammunition. there is not a universe where that should be acceptable, that like a person's just buying that in one sitting without raising up some kind of flags. Because if I buy too much fertilizer,
Yep.
yeah, Homeland Security shows up at my house asking, what the fuck are you doing? Right?
Right.
Why are you like buying all of this? And so like no one law will stop it. And it may not have been able to stop Las Vegas, right? But a combination of laws may have, right? Like he would have set off red flag laws, right? For instance, if there were better background checks, he probably wouldn't have passed those, right?
Right.
If we had magazine capacity laws, that would have reduced the number of people that could have been hurt. You know, I'm not in favor of full bans like, you know, Brett is, right? But like if there was a semi-automatic weapons ban in place, it wouldn't have happened at all, right? Because it was that particular weapon that led to the damage. I mean, he had what?
He
Like
had,
eight AR-15s and two
he
AR.
had, yeah, he had 14 AR-15s. He had 8 AR-10s. He had a 308 bolt action rifle, and then he had the 38 revolver that he unalived himself with. But he also had magazines that held up to 100 each.
Mm-hmm.
The bump stocks, which did 90 rounds in 10 seconds. He shot off over 1,058 rounds in 10 minutes. He had vertical grips, telescopic sights, bipods. He had tracer ammunition that he bought. He first tried to buy it from a dealer, and that dealer didn't have it in stock. So then he bought it at a gun show. And then he also had ammo piercing ammunition that they traced back to a dealer. He apparently didn't use that, but he had it. And they traced it back to the dealer, who then got 13 months in prison for selling it without a license. But he had a bulletproof vest, he had breathing apparatus, he had explosives. What I don't understand is, here, I don't know, I'm in New York, but if I go into a drugstore and I want to buy NyQuil, I have to show them my ID to buy NyQuil, right? You put Sudafed behind the counter. But this guy, the majority of these weapons, he had a lot of weapons at his house too, because he had a personal collection, but the majority of these he bought within a few months of this happening, and all that ammunition. And like you said, I don't understand. He's not a dealer. So like, where's the red flag? Are you a dealer? Like, I don't know.
It looks like you're planning something when you're buying that much shit in that amount of time.
Yeah, like something's bad's about to happen, right? Like whether you're going to start like a compound militia movement, or you're going to do something like what he did, right? Like buying that many weapons and that much ammunition, and the accessories should be an immediate red flag in our systems to at least like encourage like a wellness check, right?
Yeah, it took the OKC to happen, and then we do that with fertilizer, you know, and
Right.
But how many mass shootings are going to happen before, you know, we do something similar? I can't fathom why. I mean, we know, right? It's the money that goes into it and everything like that, but it's I don't understand people's obsessions with a piece of metal that kills instead of actual precious life.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I look at when some people talk about and say to me, well, you want to change this law or do this or ban this, or, how that's going to help. And I said, well, I kind of took it back to when Mothers Against Drunk Drivers started, because when that movement started, it was really about the number of, children and people that were getting killed by drunk drivers, and that something had to change and something had to be done. And so, and that was a movement, and it was over quite a few years before they started raising the drinking age, and, raising, increasing the sentences for, getting caught, and all these different things that happened that absolutely, I can tell you 100% reduced the number of drunk driving deaths. It didn't eliminate it, but it totally. So when people say to me, when people say the stupid stuff like, oh, let's ban cars because, cars kill people, like that's not the point. The point is when they did it so let's raise the age to 21, right? To drink. Or let's, okay, now a bartender can be charged if you overserve somebody and they're drunk and they're going to get in their car. It's things like that that can make a difference. And I that's why I see the difference here. Like I said, I think, Brett, is the money and the politics. The politics involved in guns is, it's sad,
Or more so the guns in politics.
well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
well,
exactly. And to your point, it was all about harm reduction, and it worked. We less lives were being lost, and then we implemented safety features on cars to even help even further. But when it comes to 60 people being killed, or a classroom of 10-year-olds, and it's like, oh well, there's nothing we can do.
yeah.
Bullshit.
And the NRA is the biggest, group to advocate against any kind of safety features, right? Like as Brett just mentioned, motor vehicle deaths have actually gone down. That used to be one of the leading causes of death for kids. It was the number one cause of death for kids 1 to 17. But for the last 3 years in a row, firearms have taken that place, right? It's for kids aged 1 to 17, firearms are the leading cause of death, outpacing motor vehicles. And if we raise that age to 1 to 19, it's been the last 4 years that firearms have gone past motor vehicles. And the biggest reason is that the automotive industry implemented a lot of things on their own, right? We passed some laws like car seat laws and seatbelt laws and things like that. But because the car manufacturers wanted to get out of being held liable, they implemented like roll cages and airbags and all of these other safety features, right? Like my car will basically drive itself, right? But the NRA opposes any of those kind of innovations to firearms. So like, if you think about like we can unlock our cell phone with our facial recognition, right? The NRA opposes any of those kind of locks on a firearm because it can cost you precious seconds to deal with a threat, right? But how many kids' lives would that save, right? Like, what would that do to the entire industry of people stealing guns to use in crime, right? If they can't activate the gun because it's biometrically locked by a fingerprint or a facial scanner or something, right? Like we have the technology, right? But the NRA opposes any of those things being done when it comes to firearms.
Well, and just think about just specifically that, right? The number of kids who are accidentally shot at their friend's house, or who have are at a bad period in their lives and they get their parents' gun and they take themselves out. Like these things could stop these things, and but the NRA is like, we don't care, we want your money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's,
we look at states too. Unfortunately, you live in Texas. I did live there for 6 years. But
glad you escaped.
I think that with the states too, because they can be making some of these decisions, on their own, and they don't. I mean, one of the reasons we ended up in Texas, when I was married previously, was because he got out of the military and he had this huge, collection. And he's very safe gun owner. Everything's by the book, whatever. But he knew he didn't want to come back to New York because the New York gun laws were so strict. And so, off we go to Texas, where it doesn't matter what you do, pretty much. And, I just don't, this is where I don't understand, when people see this happening all the time and they think that this is never going to happen to them. Right. And I guess I can say that when I used to, watch all these on TV and feel really bad, before I was involved in one. And now, and my husband will say to me, honestly, now he'll say to me when one comes out across the TV and I see it, he'll say to me, he automatically wants to turn it off. Like he doesn't want to see it. I think partially for me, I think he thinks, oh, that's, kind of a upsetting thing for me. And I said, what's upsetting is on one day that the shooting that happened at the school in California, Northern California, with these two kindergartners were shot and injured. I'm sitting there with a piece of paper, getting ready to call this school. I had already talked to them about getting, what I do with this nonprofit to them. And across the TV comes Madison, Wisconsin, and that school shooting. And I literally was a mess because I'm between upset, crying, and angry that you can't even go 2 weeks and kids are dying. And the people right over here, right next door to you, all they want to talk about is nobody's going to come and get my guns. And it's not about the guns. And I just, kids are dying. People are dying, you know? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take.
Well, and to your point on, the states can do things. Funny story, like literally tomorrow on the 14th, Texas session starts. And I've already gotten a list of bills that both sides have filed and whatnot. And they are already trying. There's one, it's called HJR 93 by Andy Cooper, who proposes a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right of every person to keep and bear arms. And what he means by that is, we know that in Article 1, Section 23, it says that in the Texas Constitution, it says that the right to bear arms for your defense of yourself or for the state, but the legislature can make laws about it for public safety. And that's not verbatim, but essentially what it is. And they want to take out that last part where it's that the legislature cannot make laws as it pertains to public safety about firearms. So the states can do things, but you have states like Texas that are trying to go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Well, I asked right after the shooting happened with me, I remember having a conversation with my ex-husband, who, like I said, 25-year Marine, big into his weapons, always very safe, got safe storage. He does the whole thing, right? But I remember having a conversation with him about that event. And he said to me, I said, explain to me from your point of view, why are people so worried about, like, say, an assault weapons ban, or, doing something even minimal, or like, what, I don't understand it. And he said, the whole slippery slope thing, oh, they're going to take this, once they start, they're going to do this and this and this, right? That was his whole thing. And then he also brought up, well, if he hadn't used, those weapons, he could have used something else. And I said, but the amount of damage that he did in 10 minutes, the amount of damage, or the amount of damage that happened at your son's school, or, these other schools, like just logically, like I just don't understand your perspective of that. You
100% improbable that had a different weapon been used in Las Vegas, that they could have done the same, that he could have done the same damage. Like it's improbable.
But then the conspiracy theories come, and I have to tell you right now, that probably makes me more angry than anything else. The conspiracy theories that come up. And why do people do that, Ben? Do you know why people do that?
Let's address the slippery slope first, though, right?
Yep.
Like, that is, to me, the dumbest fucking argument. Okay?
I agree.
Because when we passed the semi-automatic weapons ban in 1994, right? They didn't come and take pistols or shotguns or, like, bolt action rifles or even like, semi-automatic hunting rifles, right? They banned military style weapons, right? Like that included things like the AR-15, the AR-10, which were used in Vegas, right? They didn't go and confiscate those, though, from anybody either. They just prevented the future manufacture of those weapons. They didn't go and take anything from anybody. So the slippery slope argument is just part of conspiracy theory, like you were saying. This idea that, oh, the government is going to come take your guns is predicated in racism as well as in like just appealing to this mythology that we are like this independent bootstrap, nation, right? Like they harken back to the militia, right? And they have these romanticized ideas that, oh, the British were coming, so these shopkeepers grabbed their gun from behind their counter and marched out for America, right? But the reality is that the militia lost far more battles than it won. In fact, George Washington, in every single letter that he wrote during the Revolutionary War, said that if we do not get a standing army, we will not defeat the British. And it was only because of the help of Spain and France, and actually France training a military for us, right, that we got that army. Because George Washington said if the militia can even fire 2 shots before breaking ranks and running like a coward, right, he would consider them a successful like venture, right? But he hated them, famously hated them. But we have now romanticized it where that like, oh, the militia was so great and they did these amazing things, and they really didn't. Like one of the few battles that we consider a win was the Lexington and the Concord, and that battle was so tense that there was a guy literally selling alcohol to both sides, walking between both sides. That's just how intense that battle was. And the British decided, because there were rumors that there were going to be more reinforcements coming to the colonists, that it wasn't worth them engaging. So they retreated. And so it's considered a win for us. But more colonists ended up dying in the retreat than the British did during the retreat, because they started to shoot at each other. We don't know who fired first. The British retreated. But in that retreat, the British still killed more colonists than the colonists killed British soldiers, right? But that's considered a win. One of the few. But we've romanticized it, right? Like if you fast forward like 20 years, some old guy walks into a bar and somebody's like, old timer, I bet you fought in the Revolutionary War. And he's like, yeah, I did. And it sits down at the bar and they buy him alcohol, right? And we see these embellished stories. And like, we've seen this happen then with movies. Like our beliefs about what happened in the Revolution are really due to Samuel Colt and Oliver Winchester, because they paid people to put their guns in books and movies, right? Samuel Colt invented the Western genre of novel, because he went bankrupt so many times. Nobody wanted any of his weapons. And so he started paying the dime store novelist who was writing the rags to riches stories at the time, which was the most popular book of the time, to write about like the lone cowboy. And this is where the hero with no name that Clint Eastwood would famously play in all of his earlier career movies comes from, because Colt famously said, I don't care if the hero has a name, but you will name my gun on every page it's used, right? And in the first year, those books sold 30 million copies, which was unheard of in the late 1860s. Fast forward a few years, when Hollywood comes around, Oliver Winchester does the exact same thing. And you can see that, like any movie that Clint Eastwood plays in the 1950s, 60s, whatever, like he doesn't have a name. Like look at movies like Pale Rider, A Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. He literally does not have a name. They just refer to him as the Wanderer, the Stranger, or whatever. And those movies and books influence the way we think about those events in the past, which then makes us think, oh, the government's going to take our guns. And that's the only reason we stop the government, because they're afraid of us with their guns. And that's just not reality.
It romanticizes it.
Right. I just, and when it goes from the people, the people that weren't, part of these types of events, then coming up with their own, the conspiracy theories of either it didn't happen, or, reactors, or, Vegas, they talked about it was really the government, and there were some Saudi prince, and the helicopters, they were shooting from the helicopters, which was, I mean, some people actually that were there were saying it, but I'm like, like, first of all, that wasn't happening. And the initial helicopters that were there, right next to the festival event site, was the helicopter, the ones where the tourist ones where they would go to the Grand Canyon and you could pay to take a ride over the city and whatever. So they flew all the time. People ended up from the concert site running when they left and were running away. They were fleeing. They ended up in those hangars where those helicopters were. So, but all of a sudden the story is, oh, they're shooting. So it's all from this, this is, and it's like, and to this day, I still hear people talk. If I bring Vegas up, there's bound to be someone that will say that, not that it didn't happen, but it was the government behind it and all of this stuff. And it makes me angry in that, it, first of all, one, that's not what happened. And people died. People lost their lives. This really good friend that I met, she was there celebrating 10 years being cancer free. She had had so many surgeries, almost died in her 20s, like 3 times. She got shot in the face. She's had like 16 surgeries. I mean, she's literally been to hell and back and still a survivor to this day. And for people to then make it sound like this didn't happen or it was all a government thing and it was all government cover, you know what? And that's the reason why we have to have all these weapons. It just really makes me angry,
The part too that kills me, and Brett, I know you can talk about this too, is the fact that Alex Jones is the one that started that bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Like, he started it back with
Sandy
Aurora
Hook.
and Sandy Hook, right? Like he accused we had Lonnie and Sandy on here a few weeks ago. He accused them of like making up their daughter and of it didn't happen, and he did the same thing with Sandy Hook, and he had to pay, what was it, $1 billion, Brett?
Yeah, something like that, man. It was
A ridiculous amount of money, right? And yet people see him having to pay and seeing that he's making this shit up, and instead of being like, maybe I should stop saying this, we still see it.
Yeah, and back in the day, didn't we used to make fun of like conspiracy theorists and like, hey, like, come on, you wouldn't be friends with them. And now it's just like the conspiracy theorists are just so out there, and they don't realize that I don't care if they truly believe the things that they're saying. They don't realize the impact that it has on the people that survive these things, or it feels like they're making a mockery of it. I've gotten told that a million times too, like, oh, you're an actor that the Democrats paid so that you could take our guns. And one, I've never said to take anybody's guns, unless you're a threat to yourself or to others. But like, seriously, like the whole false flag and the you're an actor and everything, don't you think that these organizations would have hired a better actor? Because my ass just gets arrested, like
Couldn't drop the F-bomb at a Dunkin' Donuts, you're going to prison.
I'm saying, like, and it's just like, not that, like, you say what you want about me, I don't give a shit, but when you say something about Uvalde or something, then you're making a mockery of my son's death. If you're not telling it how it happened, then you're making a mockery of it,
right? And my husband used to say to me initially when I first came home, I watched a lot of the videos. Like, I literally, I don't know why, but I would say for that first month or two, it was almost like I didn't believe it happened. Like, I couldn't believe it happened. I couldn't believe I was there. And so literally I'd search in any video. Like, I literally would watch and watch and watch and rewatch. And actually I have a video. My niece actually found it. So it was somebody's phone video that actually shows us in the crowd when we were on the ground and shows us getting up and running. And so you can hear the gunfire in the back. You can hear it. And so I still have it, but I remember watching, and he would say to me, like, what, like, why do you keep doing that? Why, like, it's almost like, why you keep, but it was almost like I couldn't believe that this happened. Like I wanted to, this was real. This is not a movie. Like, this is what really happened. And I will say to people that are listening here, if you haven't watched the documentary, the docuseries 11 Minutes, it's, you know, it's done on Las Vegas. It's on the Paramount Plus, is on Paramount Plus, but it's called 11 Minutes. And it was done from the perspective of survivors and first responders. So I initially, when it first came out, I was, you know, now I was beyond watching the videos. I was like, okay, I pretty much know it by heart. Like, I don't need to watch them anymore. Took me a little bit to watch because it does bring you back. And there are, you know, there are parts of it that'll bring you right back to that moment of being there. But what I truly liked about it was it's all done from survivors, first responders, and those people that were in the crowd, the unsung heroes, that, you know, the off-duty police officers or firefighters or just your neighbor or somebody, guy you didn't know, who ran in to save people, right? To take them to the hospital in the back of a pickup truck. But it was from their perspective. And then, you know, kind of the afterwards for us. And I remember my daughter telling me after she watched it, because she had seen a lot of the videos before and heard my story, right? But she said to me, I didn't really understand. Like, I didn't really understand. Like, I get it. Like, you know, and you know, it was a little bit more get it. And I will say, Brett, for me, it was watching, I did go to Uvalde, but it was watching some of the body cam stuff that came out that really made this incredible impact for me of, you know, that tragedy and those kids and those teachers and the survivors, you know, in that school. And it's things like that that I wish more people that are more concerned about these weapons would really watch and take a look at, you know, and have that, bring that close to home. Like this, taking the screams out, that needs to be part of it. You need to hear that. You need to hear that. I'm sorry, like, you need to hear that. Maybe these parents don't need to relive that, but those other people do.
I say it all the time. I think they should show up until our kids' bodies. I think that's the only thing that shouldn't be shown, unless a parent allows for it. Because yeah, what they do is they try to make it palatable. Like Ben said earlier, they make it to where it's easy to digest, and then you don't really connect with it, you know. And so you don't connect with it, then you turn it off and then you go about your day, instead of, because once again, when people start feeling too uncomfortable, then it's like, well, that's enough of that. Not knowing that there's people like you and I out here that we don't get to just turn it off. That it, you know, that there's no off button. Not even when we sleep. You know, you were talking about the nightmares earlier. Crazily enough, my nightmares didn't start until about 4 or 5 months ago, because I would just go and go and go until I fall out and my mind would just shut down. But then, you know, it feels like 5 seconds, you're back up. But the nightmares, they're crazy. You don't ever get to really shut it off and to not be uncomfortable. And that's why people refuse to do it. That's why the you know, these hardcore gun owners refuse to do it. Or if they do sit down, they will, you know, try to dissect everything and then be like, oh, well, that's just propaganda to take our guns. And it's just like, no, it's, call it what you want to call it. If you want to call it propaganda, cool. Call it propaganda for saving lives, because that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's well said, Brett. You know, it's unreal to that so many people the gun is worth more than the lives of children, right? Like, I mean, I've told this story before. I've been a gun owner my entire life. I have fired more rounds than most humans will ever do. And, you know, I was one of those people, you know, in the early, 2000s. I remember when Columbine happened in Virginia Tech, and I was just like, huh, wow, that's wild, that's crazy. And then Sandy Hook happened. And that was a life-changing event for me because, I never believed you could use a gun for self-defense. And I didn't know the research then. I didn't know what the statistics were in 2012. But I didn't believe you could do it. For me, a gun was something you go to the range, you have some fun with your friends, that kind of thing. And my hobby was not worth the lives of children, right? And so when people, started arguing that their gun was worth more than 6 and 7 year olds, right? Immediately I was like, nope, I'm not complicit in this anymore. And I got rid of all my guns. Like, I wish I could say, oh, it was a heroic thing and I donated them to law enforcement and they melted them down or something. I sold them, right? I did sell them, but I got rid of them, and I made a point that I wasn't going to buy another one until we came up with real reform. Now, I didn't know that, like, almost 10 years later, we were going to have a global pandemic, right? That was going to hit us, because I still went to the range. I would just go and rent a gun while I was there, use it and then go home. And I did that probably once a week, a few times a month, something like that, all the way up. And then the pandemic happened, and the cost of that rental and the ammunition that you have to buy, because you have to buy their ammunition if you want to use their rental gun, started costing range fees to jump from like maybe $150 to like $500-$600, which is the cost of buying a gun. So I became a gun owner again just because of the global pandemic. But then Uvalde happened, and I've been struggling with keeping like the couple of handguns that I bought, and the couple of guns that I inherited when my mother died. Because again, now I know the research, less than 1% of crime is stopped by someone with, a firearm. So it's a fantasy land. We play too many video games, we watch too many movies, that when we think we can stop these events from happening. And I feel like, again, I'm complicit in the deaths of children because of owning these things.
Well, one of my daughters, my youngest daughter, moved back to Texas, where her dad lives, and she's got a daughter herself now, and she's like 30, 31, and she's her dad had taught her to shoot. He has actually a whole shooting range set up behind his house, and the whole thing, and we had a conversation. I think the conversation probably was more so after Uvalde happened, and she knew I had gone, and then I went to visit her, and now she has a daughter, right, who will be going to school this next year. She'll be going to school, and of course she's in Texas, and so I'm all like I'm all panicky about it, and but she's literally probably more influenced by her dad, in that respect. And she is a big believer that, arming teachers, the whole thing, or arming the teachers, those that want to be armed, you know what I mean? She thinks that's like, and I just tried to have a conversation with her, and it wasn't a bad conversation, but I could just tell that she truly believes that the safest place for her daughter to go to school, in looking at everything that's going on, is in Texas, as long as there are armed people in that school. And
right. So here's some facts. Maybe get her to watch this episode when I post it on YouTube, since she's not watching. Having armed security actually increases the risk that children will die. It increases the odds because the shooters always pick schools. Every one since Columbine have happened at schools with armed guards on premises, because they want the crossfire to catch more victims, because they're not going there expecting to go home. They're not going there expecting to walk away. They know they're probably going to die. They're not going to get arrested. And so they want to get the body count as high as possible. And Brett, you can speak personally. The state of Texas allows teachers to be armed. How many teachers stopped the shooter at your school?
None.
None. How many
You
officers?
I was going to say, you want to ask me how many officers?
Yeah. How many officers were in Uvalde?
376.
And those teachers that were armed, how long did they just hang out before somebody stopped it?
77 minutes.
Right. So, like, it's a fantasy. It's a fallacy to think that, having armed people will stop these events, because they're just not going to do it. And then add in the fact that teachers just can't do it, right? Like, at FSU, I'm probably one of the most qualified people to stop one of those events. But if it's one of my students, I'm going to hesitate. I'm not going to be able to pull the trigger, right? Like, and teachers with little kids and stuff, right? I'm talking about grown-ass adults, right? Like, teachers with little kids, there's no way that you've got somebody that you see every day for a full year, right? I only see people for like 12, 15 weeks. There's no way that with those relationships that you won't hesitate, right? It's just not going to happen. And then they're undertrained, right? Who's training them to be able to do this, right? Like, if law enforcement, 376 officers can't stop, how is an undertrained, underfunded teacher? They won't even give them enough for school supplies.
Exactly.
Right? How are they supposed to stop it?
Right. Well, and I tried to have that conversation with her. I have, teachers in my family. My sister, taught for almost 30 years. Her husband taught, for the same amount of time. And it's like she said, she got done, retired just kind of at the beginning of COVID, which she said, even prior to that, it was crazy, all the stuff they have to buy and all the stuff they're expected to do. And she said, basically, I feel like I'm a social worker more so than I am a teacher, there's so many divided homes, and, Billy's backpack is at dad's because he was there over the weekend, and this kid doesn't know how to put his coat on because it's upside down. And, there's so much going on. And then this kid has a medical issue, and you got to make sure that he can't have any peanuts, so nobody gives him peanuts. And she said, literally, the whole conversation when COVID was going on and remote learning was going on, and she was talking to these other teachers where, like how crazy that was. And she said, now you put on top of that, you think that they should arm teachers, that your teachers also should be expected to somehow be that security, that person who's, those teachers right there are giving up their lives. They're doing their best to do what they can to protect those kids in that situation. And, yeah, I say the same thing. The same thing happened with Parkland. They had a security guy there. He just kind of left the scene. He wasn't going to go.
Well,
Yeah.
in Columbine, I don't think a lot of people realize there were actually two armed security guards at Columbine. One of them engaged both of the shooters in the parking lot, and it was not effective at stopping them at all. They continued into the school, right, where they engaged the other one who was having lunch in the cafeteria where they came into. Neither were effective at stopping these individuals, right? Because, again, they don't care that cops are there. They don't care. They count on it. They want that to happen.
Right. Right. Well, and my daughter made the comment, well, if they don't know which teachers are armed, like say not all of them are, so how would they know which ones are and which ones aren't? And I said to her, okay, so say that's all right. So say they are. But I said, if someone comes in, so if the teacher doesn't have to have it locked up so the kids can't get it, right? So it's on their person, kind of like you got to conceal carry, it's on their person. But you got a kid or somebody that comes in with an AR-15 and he's just like blowing off, like, okay, I hope you have time to pull that out and get a shot off, because who do you think he's going to aim at first?
Yeah.
Right? Like
And,
one of the first.
and that's something else that I've talked about numerous times on here, right? Like, I stand in front of a classroom of anywhere from, 20 to 70 students, right? I am the first person you see when you walk in the room. no matter how much training I have, what does my training matter in that moment?
Right.
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 Stop, we have these fantasies. We watch too many superhero movies, too many movies like Die Hard, or whatever, where people think, oh, I can use my gun to stop these individuals, but like it's really luck, right? Like, how could someone with a gun have stopped Las Vegas?
Yeah. No, no, not, no way. I mean,
And I would argue a country music concert is where you're going to find a lot of people with guns.
well,
Right.
but look at the other one that happened in Allen, Texas. So at that at that shopping mall. So, there did happen to be a police officer who happened to be in the area who was the one that actually took down the shooter. But even before he took down that shooter, he had time to kill people. Okay. And look at in Texas, you look at how loose your gun laws are, and everybody can have a weapon, and right. So nobody stopped him before. No, there was no good guy with a gun. And, just fortunately, that police officer just happened to be in that area at that time, and was able to take him down before he killed more people. But I say, I looked at that and I said, now come on, you're in Texas where everybody can have their weapon.
Yeah.
And
No, so and that's the thing about in Texas is even if you are the quote unquote good guy with a gun, we just got done talking to Sheila last week. Greg Abbott will pardon the bad guy who kills the good guy with a gun. He'll pardon him. Even they don't believe the shit that comes out of their mouths.
right.
Like they don't at all. And I don't understand it. And I don't understand that, like, I mean, me and Ben say it all the time, but Beverly, you and I should not know each other. You
No,
know,
no.
we shouldn't have met at that Starbucks here in little old Uvalde.
Right.
I shouldn't have one of your bears. None of these things should have happened, but it's because people don't care that we do. And unfortunately, we've had to become a family of survivors and parents of survivors and siblings of survivors, or of victims, I should say. And at times it feels like it's just us that cares.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. I said when I came back here, I live in a little town that I don't know anybody. Nobody, like this stuff doesn't happen. Like this stuff so far hasn't happened in my little town, right? But so there's an online support group for, Las Vegas survivors. There's several, but because there were so many people, so there's like thousands in this group. And that's where I really connected. And I met several people, and I go back usually every year, almost every year. So I've met quite a few. What's interesting is the dynamic of how many people now are gun owners, and just I got to have my weapon, right? And um and and MAGA, 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 like huge, 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 huge base, right? On that side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably a country music thing too, but not for me. Not for me. It never was. And mind you, I live in a divided household. My husband is so not on the same page with me as far as politics goes, but so we just don't really have conversations because it doesn't
Right.
go well. But it amazes me though when I talk to some of these people, even a mom who lost her son, right? Is like so far on that side. I I just don't I don't understand that. I don't understand that either, I can be her friend and I can say, like her loss is something unimaginable. Her son did 2 tours in Iraq. He came home, got out of the military. His best friend took over. He had, I think he was in the Army, Navy. He was in the Navy, but he did the dogs. He had the dog bomb sniffing dogs and whatever. So his buddy that took his place was killed 2 weeks later. So he came home, major PTSD, all this stuff. His mother bought him tickets to Las Vegas as a birthday present. And that's where he was killed. And yet now she's on that whole side of, that other side of the gun, the gun debate. And I, gue- I guess I can't put myself in her place, right? I didn't lose a child in that way. And so I can't say that I wouldn't feel that way, but I can just say when I went to Uvalde, and I'm going to just tell this quick story about Uvalde because this impacted me so much, just the nonprofit and the comfort clubs that we do. They're just weighted therapeutic bears, but we were there for that. And this young boy, we were in this square, whatever you call it, where the crosses were all set up, and we had a table set up. And this father comes over with his son, who looked about 10. And this little boy was really quiet. And he came up to the table, and I handed him a bear. And he just said to me, "I want to give it to my friend." And I said, "Okay, but you can have one too." I said, "So you can take one and you can take one for your friend." He goes, "No, I just need it for my friend." And he starts to walk away, and his dad's kind of standing there. And he walks over and he sets it down in front of one of the crosses. And I didn't even, like, I was just so speechless, and like I didn't know what to say. And his father just said, that was his best friend. And I don't remember the name now because I do remember going over after and looking at the cross, but um, he said he didn't have anything to give to him and he wanted to make sure he had something. And that just struck me that this poor little boy who had been through this, trauma, and his friend had died, and he didn't even want that bear for himself. He just wanted to make sure that his friend had that bear. And so I gave his dad one, and I said, just take this one home for him. But I don't know, the world we live in today is crazy. And I want to feel like I can be part of the change, and I do talk about it, and people don't always want to hear it. And I talk about it anyway, and I direct them to people like you, Brett, and you, Ben, who are more educated on things that I'm not, when they get talking about 2A and whatever. I know the basics, but it's education.
Our show time is winding down.
Okay.
Brett, you want to offer some final thoughts for the night?
Yeah. First of all, going back to it, I know that kid, Beverly. He put it on Uzis.
Oh,
Yeah, I know the kid, and I know his father, which is one of the reasons why we went. And you know, Uzziah was cremated because we're not going to be here forever, and we couldn't leave him behind. But his friends needed a place to go and visit him, because all of the other kids did, but they couldn't find Uzi. So, that kid right there. There's a couple more. Was one of the real reasons why we have a headstone and a bench out there at the cemetery for them. So they can hang out with them.
right.
And just we know that life is too short. Sometimes it's shorter for others, than it will be for you. But the fact of the matter is that we have to love ourselves and our society. Like, we have to love one another as what we are, and that's other humans. Like, the empathy is gone, the sympathy is gone. People are too worried about what is going on 100% in their lives, instead of seeing what's going on as a whole. And I was one of those people for a long time until this happened. And now I say it all the time, and I'll say it again. you can't you can't live for yourself. You can't live for, one. We fight in Uzziah's name. We fight so that another parent doesn't have to. We fight so that another child doesn't have to, lose his life out of school. We fight so people can go to concerts in peace. And that's truly what it means to live. And so we have to do better as a whole, as a society.
Yeah.
Just do better.
I think that's an understatement. We sit here and, it's 5 years, between what happened at Las Vegas and then what happened in Uvalde, and nothing was changed in between those events, right? Like, we executive order banned bump stocks, but the Supreme Court just gave that back
Yeah.
in 2024, right? But beyond that, we did absolutely nothing to try and prevent these events from happening, because unlike every other social problem in this country, this is one of the few, the other being racism, that we just throw our hands up in the air and say, can't do a damn thing about it, doesn't matter, it'll happen anyway. And that's nonsense, because we see in this country that states with stricter laws have fewer gun deaths overall. They have fewer mass shootings, they have fewer homicides, fewer suicides, fewer accidental deaths, and yet we can't notice those correlations and try and do something to reduce it. And the inconsistency between states, right? States like Texas and Louisiana and Florida and Alabama and Mississippi, those are the states that these guns are coming out of, that go to other states like California and Illinois and New York, where the gun crimes that are committed there happen. And so we have to do better, because it is a horrible indictment on a society that when children die, or people at a concert die, or people in a movie theater die, and we just say, not anything we can do about it because my right, that we just continue to allow that to happen. And that's where I'll land the plane for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank everybody for coming here. This has been Stories from the Cold Dead Hands. We'll be back next week, next Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And hopefully one day we will have no more stories to tell. But until then, signing off.
This has been Stories from the Cold Dead Hands with Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow and Brett Cross. Hopefully one day we will not have any stories to tell. But until that day arrives, remember to love one another and be kind to each other. Until next week, signing off.